welcome back, folks. We're in the middle of the NFL draft. First 1, 2, 3 rounds already went. Yesterday and the day before, as we're shooting this on Saturday, it's only the first 3 rounds, but welcome back.
Thank you.
Good to see you as always. How's life going?
Well, I took my glasses off for this one so everybody could see the bags under my eyes. That's how busy life has been, and obviously want to film as much as we can. And,
I'm trying.
It's hard right now, but obviously with the draft going on, I mean, depending on how you look at it. Big surprise, maybe not as big of a surprise to some. Just depends on who you talk to, and we'll get into that later.
Yeah, we said we've been busy, so we're trying to film as much as possible. So we would squeeze this in, even though the draft is not over. I feel like the first 3 rounds has been pretty interesting and all of that.
Yep.
Another thing also during the draft, was you saw Kevin Banks.
Yeah.
When he got drafted and his kid puke, it was pretty funny, and there's been a lot of memes about that. But what's your take on that?
Having kids, and obviously my kids are older now.
Yeah.
In their teenage years, when we had babies, and part of raising kids, man, is they're going to throw up whenever. They're going to pee on you whenever. They're going to use the bathroom all over the place. But what was funny is when they announced it, mama of the kid did not look like she forgot she had a baby.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So
that baby's
she starts bouncing that kid's head back. That's a natural reaction for an infant, is to just vomit, projectile vomit, and it doesn't matter where you are. Good thing is, looks like the baby's well fed.
Oh, yeah.
He had some food. He had some food in the belly, but yeah, Mama Bear forgot she had the baby on her lap.
Oh boy, that was a good one. That was a good one.
But hey, man, he got drafted high. Mama's obviously happy 'cause she ain't got to worry about money no more. So hey, it happens. I'm not sure I would have reacted any different.
So we're actually gonna get into the draft. And the first thing, which I hate for this to actually be the biggest draft news, is how Shedeur Sanders has actually slipped.
Yeah,
he slipped from the first round, which okay, you're like, okay, well. Maybe surprising to some people, because for some people he was the number 1 quarterback.
Yep.
Joe Clapp, who we both watched, and I would say had him as his number 1. I think even Mel Kiper had him as his number 1 quarterback.
Yep.
But based on need and all of that, Cam Ward was the consensus number 1 player that that was going to get drafted.
Right.
So. Different mock drafts has had him, going to the Saints, going to, Pittsburgh and all that kind of stuff. And then come to find out he missed out in the first round. And it's like, okay, a little surprising, but we're not going to lose our minds yet. Yeah. So everybody's like, well, he's definitely going day 2, round 2, or round 3, And no quarterback was actually picked up in the second round, I believe. So third round comes around where teams fill some holes and they're looking for essentially backups and all that kind of stuff. And there's 4 quarterbacks outside of Cam Ward that gets picked up, and he still has not been picked up yet. What are your thoughts on that?
I've got a couple.
Right.
So first of all, I think what the hard part for him, and I think why people say it's surprising, is because the first round was floated out there.
Right.
And I really, most teams from, if you hear, it doesn't matter where Kiper and, McShay and Fields and all those have him ranked as a quarterback, it's what round the teams have him graded at.
Right.
Most of the teams had him as a round 2. You have the baggage that comes with Dion. Some good, it's not all bad. It's not. He's not a terrible human being. Obviously, it's just the notoriety of his name and everything. So, when you look at that first round being floated out there, then a couple teams that his name has been floated to go with a different quarterback, 100%. And you have, guys like Gabriel being taken towards the end of round 3, and obviously Tyler Shuck. being taken, which was wild. That one was wild to me.
Yeah, so he did go number second round. My bad. I was saying, yeah.
So that one was a surprise to me. And then it gets into, okay, well, were teams really that high on Shedeur? Or did maybe they pass on him in the first and with their first picks to maybe see if another team takes him so it doesn't fall back on the teams because maybe they weren't going to pick him in the first place. Right. And they knew that. But now, the teams that need quarterbacks picked one up and they're not Shedeur. Yeah. And then now you're looking at basically after round 2, you're looking at teams are just picking up a quarterback to be a backup.
Right.
Which is, obviously what he would be anyway, regardless of what team and all of that. So I could see, I don't think it'll happen, but there's some people out there saying he's going to go undrafted free agent. I don't think that'll happen. I think a team will take a shot.
Right.
The surprising part was if he's slipping, okay, that's one thing. But then these other quarterbacks being taken in front of him just makes me think that teams really didn't, you've heard, or I've seen a lot of the news out there that McShay put out. I've seen a couple others actually this morning saying that the interviews did not go well.
Right.
Don't know what that means, but they're not going to share what they, what the interviews look like. Was it when they put him to the test in real live X's and O's that he didn't perform well? Was it, the arrogance and that part that has been associated to it? But listen, these guys that are getting drafted are the top 1% of all football players.
Well, yeah,
if you don't have arrogance and confidence and all of that, then I've never met an athlete, that didn't have it. I'm 41 years old. If somebody said, hey, if we played one-on-one, who do you think would win? I'm going to say me all the time. That's just a natural part of it.
Right.
Couldn't do that. And if somebody said, what are you going to run the 40? I'm going to say, 4.5. That ain't going to happen either. But it's the confidence and it's the arrogance and, all of that comes with it. So it's Sean Payton probably said it best that if you look at the talent, what he did, those things are there.
Right.
Outside of the pocket, struggles, makes some mistakes and things like that. But
that's all off script plays. And how many people are good on off script plays? Let's look at the NFL. I mean, you could say Lamar just goes to uses his legs. You can say Allen. You can say Mahomes. You can say even Jalen Hurts just goes. He can use his legs. Now you can put in Washington's quarterback, Jalen Daniels, in there. But really, when play is busted, how many quarterbacks are, being great on off-script plays? Yeah. So, and I don't want to get into any, none of that kind of other stuff like race and nah, I'm not going to get into that. But
I've heard that. The only issue with that is the first quarterback taken was African American, and so it's again, what is that part of it? Is it ownership on some of these teams? Like the Giants, that was a big one. Do you want with Dayball and those guys knowing they have to win now?
That was. I think they went to like his pro day. They have been in Colorado multiple times, and there's like when you see videos of Brian Daboll and Shane Steichen talking to Shedeur, like hands around him, and they've moved back into the first round.
And you thought that was what?
That's everybody's like, oh, they just traded back into the first one. He's definitely gone. And then they picked Jackson, Dart, which is okay. My big problem is, with and I was not even gonna go through it and like kind of say names of other quarterbacks that have been picked up. Just because they've worked hard and there's a reason they're in the draft. Like like you said, they're 1% and all of that, but if you look at talent-wise, Shedeur is definitely better than some of these quarterbacks that have been picked before him.
Yep.
So then it makes you start realizing, wait, is something going on? You know, and they talk about the arrogance, like you said. Like, if you don't believe in yourself, who are you supposed to? And I get it about, you know, there's just something about, I feel like there's a humbling thing going on. You know, people talking about we're going to humble him and his dad or some that kind of stuff. But, you know, Manziel was arrogant, but don't get me wrong, Manziel did win the Heisman. What do you call him? Guy that went to Oklahoma and went to Tech, and he said
Baker.
that Baker Mayfield was arrogant, and that was it. You know, was the thing about how he's very arrogant. But don't get me wrong, he also won the Heisman Trophy. Okay, so I get that, but then it's kind of like they're using his confidence, okay,
Against him,
which is very, very hard and wrong and very hard to watch. As a young person,
Cam Ward was just as arrogant in the pre-draft interviews, and what he, you know, even when you looked at, you know, the camp that they went to together and things that he said to him, like during the camp on film,
right?
So
it's like, and then like I guess, you know, I understand his dad had a mic in front of him every day. He's a coach,
yeah,
and they're gonna ask him questions like, you know, if some, and I saw some stuff online, and somebody made a good point about how if he's sitting behind somebody and that person is not playing good and his dad has a, you know,
part of it.
I get that and all that kind of stuff, but I feel like there's too much emphasis being put on, you know, oh, your dad, you know, you and all that kind of stuff, and he's being punished for that. You know, I mean, don't get me wrong, love Dylan Gabriel and all of that, but I'm sorry, but Shedeur is a better quarterback than Dylan Gabriel. They talk about you know, Jalen Miro. Love Jalen Miro. Very inconsistent. That is true. You know, Tyler Short. I watched this kid at Texas Tech. He's 25 years old. Did you see his comp? Like,
yes.
So it's kind of like, what is going on? You know, it just feels like there's a deeper, you know, thing going on. And Stephen A. Smith just had, you know, something. And we love Stephen A. Smith, but you know, sometimes he can get a little too crazy. But he said something this morning about this is a bad look for the NFL. It feels like Kaepernick level collusion. Okay, all the hard work the NFL league puts in to eradicate these kind of perceptions. You know, it might not be there what they're trying to do, but then it's just a bad look for the NFL. You know, only to turn around and watch as the owners look like they're colluding, messing up something. What has been done to Shedeur will outshine everything else in the draft. So I'm not saying it's a race thing, like, because there's a bunch of, you know, African American black guys in there that's getting drafted, you know. So it's not, I won't say it's a race thing, but then it just looked like they're using something like his confidence and being interpreted as arrogant, entitled and all like used against him, which is very bad.
The only the last kind of 2 points I'll make on it. First one being kind of going back to Dion and you know, in college he's only had really one coach.
True.
And so some teams may have looked at that and said, hey, he only knows his dad as a head coach. I didn't follow Jackson State as much to know who the quarterback's coach was or offensive coordinator. So there's a piece of me that thinks that when they got into the interview process and they start actually digging into the X's and O's of football, that maybe he's lacking what some of these other guys have, because love Dion. I think he's a great motivator. I think he's a great leader as a head coach. I don't know
about scheme.
I've never seen him, he was on the defensive side of the ball. And, you know, you could argue that, well, as a corner, you would have to know what quarterbacks are going to do, look at all of that to coach his son. Hey, here's what the defensive backs are looking at. So I think there might be a piece of that nobody wants to come out and say because they respect Dion and he's a Hall of Famer, and that's not going to get out there. The piece about race and, everything that's going on with things like DEI and all of that, I don't think that really comes into play because, in those scenarios, lowered standards and all of that comes into play in the regular workforce. But when you look at sports, I mean,
these guys are good.
African Americans make up, a bigger portion of the better talent. and it wouldn't make sense,
Right.
you know what I mean, to for that to come into play. So again, we're never going to know the full part of it. If owners are colluding, if they're talking, if coaches are talking to each other, and hey, here's what I saw, even if they did like him and thought about picking him. The second part of that goes more into draft capital for quarterbacks,
Right.
and originally, I'll say I've changed my kind of stance on this. Originally, I thought, okay, Cam Ward, he's going to go number 1. They love him. That's, and then there's going to be a little bit of a drop off. Maybe he goes in that 21 spot to Pittsburgh, or he goes 29. And then he kept dropping in the mocks, like leading up to it.
Right.
So that shows what people are actually hearing. And the biggest part I think that affects Shedeur is because this quarterback draft class is considered on the weaker side.
100% is.
What they're looking at for 2026, teams are probably saying, let's get these needs settled before guys like Arch Manning, Drew Aller,
all these guys,
Nussmeier, Sellers, Carson Beck, Dante Moore. So that made sense to me until these other 4 quarterbacks were
was getting picked up.
and that's where I'm like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense because if you don't believe in these guys or you don't trust them,
but why
are you picking them now? Again, they could be picking these guys to be future backups, and they've identified one of these other guys to go get next year. We've seen it where quarterbacks will take quarterbacks, multiple years. Cleveland Browns did it for a while, but again, I feel bad for Shedeur. A lot of people don't, because obviously financials and money and things like that don't really affect him because of NIL and his dad and all of that. But as a human, as a competitor, his confidence is taking a shot.
Yeah. And
like Sean Payton said this morning, if they were in a position like they viewed him as a top quarterback pick for them, they're set, but that chip's going to be on his shoulder for whoever does pick him to come in and they'll get the best out of him. What that ends up translating to, well, we won't know. But
and then one last thing, then we can move on, is I don't know if you saw, because you're now on like Twitter and all that, I don't know if this made it to like your social media stuff, but he got a prank call.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, so the only phone number, like they basically just got a phone number that is just for the draft, and they got a prank call on the phone number, and somebody goes, hey, you're gonna have to wait a little longer. Like the person impersonated like an NFL GM. Sad. Like it happened yesterday, and when he got the call, was very excited. Like family started coming around, and it turned out to be a prank call. I mean, like guys, like. And that is a number that he was talking about how that is the only number that was given out to NFL executives and coaches and all of that. So it's
social media is a whole different discussion. Not for I didn't grow up with it in sports. Obviously, I was older when Facebook came around. And I could not imagine those guys in today's world, what messages they receive, what comments they get, the hate and all of that. It's really crappy to say the old terminology. It comes with the territory.
Right.
I mean, it shouldn't. It happens now. Kids in school bullied at school, and then they go home and they're bullied all night on social media, and this is part of it. He's a big boy. He's got a good family support system.
Oh yeah, definitely. He's in high spirits. He looks like what he said and come out. He's in high spirits.
It doesn't surprise me that he didn't go in the first round.
I'm not that surprised.
The surprising part is the other quarterbacks, and now he's looking at a late. I don't know, maybe mid 4th to 5th, but
listen,
the argument there is there's a lot of great quarterbacks that were taken in 5th, 6th round.
Hey, if you can say there's only one bright thing that has come out of this, Shedeur, listen up. The guy, the most, a guy with the biggest or the highest paid QB was picked up in the 4th round. So, the greatest quarterback ever was picked up in the 6th round. So you know what? Let them do whatever they want to do. God is in control, just like he's saying. Everything's gonna work out as it is.
And the argument there is he's gonna find a better spot.
Yeah.
not going to go where Cam is, and some of those guys that go top first round, top 10, that go to terrible situations and ruins their career. Some can handle it, some don't. It's a sink or swim kind of situation for, Cam and those guys, but hopefully he'll end up on a solid roster, and he can wait a year, 2 years, work on what he needs to, and the team's built around him. And then when it's his chance, the Patriots back in the day when Brady took over, it was because of an injury. They already had a very good team, and a lot of his first Super Bowl, second Super Bowl wasn't him just blowing the league up. It was he had a solid support system team wise, and he just was a manager, don't make big mistakes, and after that, the rest is history. So.
So, moving on. Your beloved Dallas Cowboys on, Thursday with number 12 pick, everybody, Ted McMillan, is off the board, So now everybody's like, oh, okay, well, they're going to go one of these receivers. Golden is on the board, and Ezeiruaku is on the board, tons of guys are on the board, and they go. So I come out of the room, and then Mom goes, "We can hear you out. We can hear you." Cause I see the pic, and I go ballistics, and I'm like, "What the heck?" And again, this is nothing to do with Tyler Booker.
No.
Greatest reaction to a pick I have ever seen since I started watching the NFL. Dude is full of energy.
Yep.
Sounds like great guy. Hard worker. I get the idea of the pick, but Jesus, can we get some excitement? In terms of not the play, but can we get the offense some help? I love Tyler Booker. I think he's gonna be great, but it's just, oh my God, Cowboys, and they go second. So now the 44th pick comes around, and everybody's like, oh, you know what? They're definitely going wide receiver here. You know who was on the board? Trey Harris. Trey Harris was on the board, and I even tweeted.
I think Burton was there too, right?
Yeah,
Burton.
I was like, Cowboys, Trey Harris is on the board. Don't piss me off. And then they go defensive end. Donovan Ezeiruaku, I believe his name. From Boston College.
Yep, defensive end.
Great. I'm happy for him. Nigerian brother. I'm not Nigerian, but I love them.
African.
African, same thing. So yeah, and then they go the third round and pick a cornerback that you are actually telling me right now that he is removed from an ACL injury. Yep. So what is going on? Seriously, I think these guys are going to be good, but it's just
here's the Cowboys. If you look at what they've done the last several years, and even when they built the solid offensive line and they were running the ball and they had Zeke and Dak was doing his thing, and you thought that was their Super Bowl years, when they were 12 and what was it, 12 and 4, 12 and 5, a few years in a row.
12 and 5.
And even before that, because they kind of rebuilt the offensive line there. But back when they had Martin and Frederick and
2016 they went 13 and 3,
So
2016.
The Cowboys' problem has not been the draft; it's been free agency. They've had some really good picks, and again, this is a smart pick for them. Obviously, losing their guard, and losing Martin, and you having to replace him. I get it, but when you look at the reaction of Green Bay when they took Golden, before they announced the player, and the guy gets up there and says, for the first time since 2002, the crowd automatically starts going nuts. Yeah? So I wish, again, I wanted them to get Golden, not just because obviously he played at Texas. He played at Houston before that. He's a Texas kid. It would have been, a great story. I think the two fits between CD and Golden would have worked very well together.
And not to cut you off, when he came for his visit to the Cowboys, it was great. He even calls Jerry Coach Jerry. Yeah, so that would have been great.
Yep.
Apparently Jerry Jones even called Golden's mom when he came to visit. He was FaceTime your mom and was told her how good of a job she did with Golden. Yeah. So it was everything was just pointed at that.
It did, and again, it comes down to what was the bigger need, and I think obviously the Cowboys felt like, and the way they've built their team in the past is, now you got to protect a $60 million quarterback. And, the only issue that I have with this pick and kind of where it sits in terms of the long term is, Dak's probably going to finish out his contract here. He's got really 4 years to do something. And, they just drafted a couple of offensive linemen. 3 years ago, they got Smith, which is he obviously turning into a great player.
He's an all-pro.
They brought one in last year, and then now they've got going to be a rookie who they're going to expect to put in right away.
Oh, yeah.
And those guys are still young. And it's going to take a couple of years for them to get used to the run blocking schemes and, obviously the bigger size and the athletes in the NFL. And then you're going to be 2-3 years down the road, Dak on the last year and older. And what are you going to do there? And we don't know what weapons they're going to have, even with the offensive line, because obviously running back's still a massive need. They really have one solid option. You don't know really what you're going to get with Ferguson from game to game to help out with that. So I would have loved for them, from an excitement standpoint, to go, give the fans something to
look forward to, man.
Say you're all in, and it's flashy. It's a flashier pick to go wide receiver. Obviously, weapons typically are, and that's why you saw Green Bay's celebration and their excitement, and I think that's a great spot for him. So for him, I'm actually really happy with that, because obviously you know what you get with the Cowboys organization. He'll have a chance to win a Super Bowl probably in Green Bay, where he probably wouldn't here. But again, with some of the weapons they have, obviously they got a good run game up there. They got Jacobs, Love's coming on, and I think it's a good spot for him.
So they still have they don't have a fourth. They don't have a fourth round pick, because that's what they use for Jonathan Mingo, who has not. God, hopefully he can pick it up or something. But they have 2 6th rounds and then 1 7th. And really, to be very honest, anything after the 3rd, 4th round, you really drafting for guys, and you just hope they can even be backups. At that point. But I just look and double check, and Puka Nacua is a 5th round pick. Okay.
Yep.
So I'm right now. I'm just praying to the football gods that Jerry could even go receiver in the 5th round, and hopefully we can get 75% of the player that Puka Nacua is, and get like Dak and CD some help, really, because it's kind of sad at this point. It's really sad at this point. Yeah,
because he's gonna get. He targets CD a lot, even when it's not the first read. Second read is going to CD. So it's 60% of the looks right now. They've got to change it up if they want to be successful. And they've got the issue with that is a lot of times it's like, okay, well, when CD's not the target, where are you going? If it's tight end, if it's they had Cooks for a little bit, and obviously he's gone, and so then you can typically rely on your run game a little bit, take some pressure off, and they don't have that either. So it's now understand that you got to build your offensive line for both of those. But with younger offensive linemen transition to the NFL, it's not as easy as a freshman coming into a college team and starting. So there's going to be a learning curve, and it may take a couple years, and then you're back into that 3-year window. And if it doesn't work out, then guess what? It's another 5 years after that you got to build for. So they got to go skill position on round 5, 100%. They got to. I will say the pick, the guy that's, I think, what was it, Revel, that's coming
Revel,
off of from ECU. He's coming off of that ACL.
Right.
A lot of the folks think that if he didn't tear that ACL, he'd have been a first rounder. He's got the size, he's got the length.
He's like 6'2".
Yeah, and so I think it'll end up being a good pick. They did this with the linebacker out of Notre Dame. I don't even know how long ago it was, 10 years ago maybe, where tore his ACL in the bowl game and was out and dropped a few rounds because of that. He would have been a top 10 pick.
Right.
Turned out to be a productive player for several years for the Cowboys, and then I think injuries, caught up to him. So if they can get him healthy, ACLs now are definitely not. They weren't career ending before,
Right.
but they're definitely now. Guys don't lose as big of a step as they do with like an Achilles. So I think he'll be able to come in relatively quick and compete for some time. And if they can sew up the back end, obviously they picked up the guy from Boston College on the defensive side. Maybe he can develop into a solid pass rusher. Defense was terrible last year.
I heard he was pretty good last year. So
defense was terrible. So I don't want to say it surprised me they took offensive linemen rather than a good defensive tackle or somebody in the first round, but they took offensive linemen first, and then now they're trying to sew up the defense. So it won't surprise me if they don't go wide receiver and they try to do something, in free agency. But again, it's going to be limited on what kind of capital you have, because again, they don't have certain rounds because they traded those last year, and so it's difficult when you don't have a lot to work with.
Perfect. So just to kind of cap it up, and all, I mean, Travis is at Jacksonville right now. Matthew Golden, you touched a little bit on that. Went to the Packers. Abdul Carter, so Giants. Just Jahdae Barron to Broncos.
Love
When I saw that pick, I was like, "Are you freaking kidding me?"
Yep.
Like now it's a no-fly zone. Mile High City and Broncos.
And just real quick on that, if you look,
that's what I want you to touch up on those.
So if you look at the Broncos, most sacks in the league for the first time in 15 years or whatever it was, and they've got those guys that are younger that are returning. The biggest part of it was there was some games, even though when you look at the stats and it shows the Broncos at 18 points a game, which was top 5 in the league. The issue was in the bigger games against the better teams, when they didn't get that pressure on the defensive side, they really didn't have the back end outside of Surtain.
Right.
Obviously he was Defensive Player of the Year. Outside of him, there was some gaps in there. So you bring Barron in, who, obviously can play corner if they need to, use him in the slot. He can do that. He can play safety as well. So really like that pick for Denver. It makes them immediately better.
And nobody talks about Nick Bonito and I think he had 13 and a half sacks last season. He was a dog. So you have him up there, and I think they were playing him DN a little bit, or linebacker. So you have him up there. You have Surtain and Jahdae Barron.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, they got. I mean,
it's nice.
It is. It is.
Real
And then
nice.
obviously you're going to have your quarterback who's got another year, who came out and did some great things. So it, they had some. They had Sutton, who stepped up pretty big towards the second half of last year.
Listen.
So they've got some that I would with Sean Payton there, with what he can do and create.
Oh my God!
I think the Broncos could be a problem this year.
They picked RJ Harvey, who was also high. He was marked to the Cowboys a few times. God, we missed out on all the running backs: Kenshawn Jenkins, and Trey Hendrickson, RJ Harvey. Like, God, yeah, wow.
Travis Hunter, I think. Obviously it depends on what they want to do with him, whether they want to give him a shot to play both ways. He's not going to be playing every snap both ways, but the Jaguars need a lot of help. I'm not sold on Lawrence. A lot of people like him and say
I think Lawrence should be your fantasy quarterback this year.
Yeah, I don't think so. He, it just sometimes it looks like he's a rookie in the NFL, and then sometimes it looks like he's a seasoned vet, and it's like, where is the disconnect in consistency? So again, I felt like Travis was going to go high.
Oh, he will, yeah.
And that we talked about it already. When you go high to a team, the team has needs.
It's going to be a crappy situation. Yeah.
The Giants, I think, are leading the draft.
God, Abdul Carter.
Yeah, because
man,
because you got with him going there and then them trading back in to get a long term, more of a project. Dable. There was some rumors that came out a couple days ago where there was some ownership comments that maybe he has a little bit more time than win now.
Oh.
If he now doesn't mean he can go 2-15.
No.
But if he's close, if he's in that 7-10, they take a step forward. If he's close to 500, I think he's going to get a little bit extra time, and I think that's why they went with a quarterback that's going to take them a couple of years to really move forward with. But yeah, the defense, they got some depth now rushing the passer.
Does this make the NFC East probably the division with the best front because Abdul Carter is going to Giants, Michael Parsons is on Cowboys.
The Giants have that other guy I forget his nickname.
Oh, Sexy Dexy? Dexter Lawrence, Sexy Dexy.
There you go. Yeah,
and then they got Jalen Carter up in Philly.
Yeah.
And even Washington got like Armstrong, got some nice guys.
I think the NFC East, from a depth standpoint,
boom,
they do.
We're back.
And again, it goes back to the Cowboys on where they're at because you look at playoffs, they're going to have to, obviously win the NFC East or finish second to grab a wild card. Yeah. And it's going to be tough. And then the Giants got better. I don't think they're going to be in that third spot. I think the Cowboys right now are still going to be competing for that second spot with Washington because the Eagles.
Oh, you're committed already.
To what?
You committing the Cowboys making the playoffs already?
No.
Okay, you just said.
I said the only way they would compete is with that second spot. Don't. I told you last year. I think I had 7-10 last year when we started.
Yeah.
Now I didn't expect Dak obviously to go down. I just thought they were going to suck anyway, even with them. But this year I think there's going to be some challenges because the defensive side is not going to be that much better.
Yep.
The Eagles continue to get better. They picked up Andrew Makuba, safety.
Man, every freaking thing has just fallen
it keeps falling into place for them.
Oh my God!
Yep. From an organization standpoint, the Cowboys are chasing them, and it's not. Right now it's not even close. They're not even the same. If you had heats and races, Eagles are in heat 1 winning, and the Cowboys are in heat 5 finishing 5th or 6th. So it's
and that's very generous.
It is, and then again Washington has their offensive weapons, and then defensive side they continue to get better, and it's going to be tough.
Perfect.
For the Cowboys.
All right, well. Great episode. Nice chat on the drafts. We still got stuff. We just gonna see how everything else falls in the draft. Then mini camps and training camps are gonna start up here, and we will get into our over unders or just go through the Cowboys schedule, and then you can tell them what you think. Even though last season I think I had them winning.
You had them in the playoffs at 10-6.
I think 10 and 7.
No, 10 and 7.
So I think it flipped. Yeah, and then I think you did have them at 7 and 10. So you were right, but I did have them at 10 and 6. So we're gonna do that again.
Think about it's going to be like last year. Remember, there was like 5 games where I told you it could go one way or the other. It's going to be close games, and it's coin flip. And I just felt like they weren't going to pull those games out. When we look at the schedules, there may be some of those games where a coin flip goes Cowboys' way, but there's going to be those 5 games every season that are going to,
I would not. We wouldn't do that episode until like a week or 2 weeks before the season starts. That way, I know what is Dak looking like. Who is starting running back? Because they're not going to catch me making any
throwing to.
Yeah, I'm not going to make any commitments right now and then have my foot in my mouth. Nah, So, well.
All right.
Thanks for coming up.
You bet.
I will see you hopefully in the next one, guys. Well, like, subscribe, comment. Appreciate you guys on the support on YouTube, on TikTok, and everywhere, Instagram, and all of that. So we'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you. Bye.